Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food and with movement. And today we will talk about why your eating disorder is not logical, because oftentimes when we have an eating disorder, it seems so clearly, it seems so logical, and it has a lot of great ways to convince us that what we're doing is right. When we choose recovery, the eating disorder tends to find a lot of reasons why recovery is not right, why we should at least stick a little bit to the eating disorder, or why we should not recover at all. So today we will talk about how your eating disorder is lying to you and also what happens in the brain when you have an eating disorder, or also when you recover, and why certain things feel so hard to overcome when in fact they are really, really possible to overcome. So let's start talking about what happens in your brain when you have an eating disorder. The main things that we talk about when we talk about eating disorders and the impact of the brain are the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex plays a big role when it comes to decision making, and that can be very, very impaired when we have an eating disorder. And it can play a big role because all of our decisions when we have an eating disorder are normally made for the ED, so that we can, whether it's saving up calories, whether it's moving around, whether it's getting the time to purge, everything that has to do with that is very, very likely impaired by the impact that the ED has on your prefrontal cortex. Another part of the brain that is really impacted by EDs is the amygdala. It's a little part of your brain that kind of looks like an almond, and that part of the brain can actually lead to heightened anxiety, fear, normally around food, body image, gaining weight, but oftentimes it can also go over to other things. A lot of people with eating disorders also experience a lot of OCD behaviors or OCD thoughts that can also be impacted by the amygdala. And this heightened anxiety around food and weight gain, of course, plays a huge role when it comes to, making recovery choices, because the ED and the amygdala that is so impacted by the ED will always find reasons why it is the worst thing ever to gain weight, when in fact it's just like a bodily reaction, and a reaction that we can actually measure in your brain due to the eating disorder. The insula, another part of your brain, is also super important when it comes to eating disorders, because not only can it have an impact on your body image, on your perception of yourself, it can also have an impact on disrupted hunger and fullness cues. So a lot of people, for instance, don't really experience hunger cues anymore if they're restricted for a long time, and therefore it feels so easy. Sometimes it's like, but it's so easy. I'm not even hungry. I don't even have to make myself not eat because I'm not feeling hungry anymore. It's so easy, I can just stick with my ED. When in fact, the insula is very likely very impacted by the ED. And of course, that among other things, we also talk about ghrelin and leptin a lot, hunger hormones. There's a lot of other things that can play a part too, but this is one part that can play a role. And as I said in the beginning, the insula also plays a role when it comes to body image. Unfortunately, there's a big misconception. A lot of people think as long as I'm in a malnourished body, okay, my brain is kind of impacted, I'm not eating enough, therefore I'm not perceiving myself right. But it takes way, way, way longer for your brain to catch up than it does for your body and for the weight to catch up. So oftentimes we gain weight and we still struggle with disrupted body image. And that can go in both directions. Sometimes we still feel like we're in that sick body, and then other people don't perceive us as that sick person anymore, or we see a picture of ourselves and we realize my body doesn't look that sick anymore, but I still feel sick. And maybe my body image is now, turning towards the other direction, but then at the same time, the same person perceives themselves as a way too big, and then it gets really confusing because before that they might have been used to, okay, I'm seeing myself bigger than I am, but now I'm actually experiencing both ways. And that is something super, super common. That is actually something that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. We just don't talk about it enough. This is something that can be so distressing because now you really cannot trust your brain anymore, and it feels like, oh my God, am I going insane? I can't even trust that judgment. And that is oftentimes where it becomes so important to step aside from the external view, if you will, and to learn, okay, I can still trust my judgment in terms of I'm choosing recovery and that is the right thing. I don't even have to know what my body looks like because I trust that choosing recovery is the right thing. But again, that is something that can be very impacted by the insula, and that's just like another thing to keep in mind. And we also oftentimes talk about dopamine or the dopamine highways, also known as the reward system of your brain, that can be really, really impacted by an eating disorder. And that can show up in different ways. Sometimes it's an altered response to food, sometimes it's an altered response to control, to restriction, and therefore dopamine gets released, and that again can go both ways. I give you an example of my own experience. When I had an eating disorder, not eating for a long time at a time, for like a whole day or something like that, and walking around felt very, very good because I felt like, okay, I had like a certain time in my mind, and until that time I couldn't eat and I have to make so and so many steps, and that felt really good. It felt very controlled, and it really gave me those dopamine hits. Every time I checked my step count and I saw it went up, it was a dopamine hit. Every time, the time would progress and I saw it's already later and later in the day and I still didn't eat, it felt good. So then at night, it actually felt really good to eat because I felt like I earned my food and now is the time where I'm allowed to eat. So the dopamine hit actually worked in both ways. It worked with restriction and control, and then also when I was eating. So that's why for a very long time I thought I'm not really sick enough, or I'm not really having an eating disorder because I still like food, which is an absolute misconception. A lot of people, most people with eating disorders love food. It's not about them not liking the food. It is about the control, it is about the disordered behaviors, and of course about a lot more things. I know that I not always touch on things like trauma, or like other, psychological factors. I'm very, very aware that all of these can play a big role and that it's not always that simple. But generally speaking, I'm just covering these topics so that you have a better understanding of your own disorder and then therefore can work with whatever else you want to work on. So let's take a look at the brain in recovery and why not everything just automatically improves when you're eating more, why it needs more time and also more rewiring, more work. So when we start recovering, when we allow ourselves to rest, when we start to eat more food, we would oftentimes think that things become way easier. For me, that was the case in my mind. I thought I'm going to eat more, I'm going to move less, and finally I'm going to, stop those behaviors, and I'm going to be super happy because now I can actually live the life that I want to. Well, that's what I thought. What actually happened was the more I tried to decrease my behaviors, to decrease my movement, and to eat more, the more depressed I got. Up to the point where I actually had a panic attack, which I had never had before. I had a panic attack after eating. My body image was actually way more disordered than before. And of course, for my brain, it was a simple explanation. Yes, it's because I gained so much weight in such a short amount of time, which of course I didn't. But that was my eating disorder already trying to interfere with my recovery in the very, very early stages. And I did not feel great. In fact, I really fell into a deep depression. Part of it was that a lot of emotions came up that I had suppressed for so long. Part of it was that I didn't know who I was without an eating disorder. And part of it was also my brain reacting to recovery. So let's take a look at that. We talked about the amygdala before and the fact that with an eating disorder, we often have a heightened fear response around food. And the same thing can actually happen in recovery, because the thing with the amygdala is the fear and the stress response stays high. The amygdala stays very alert in the beginning of recovery. And part of it is because of the learned behavior. For so long, you taught yourself that weight loss is something great and that weight gain is the worst thing in the world. And with your action, you tried to avoid weight gain and you tried to at least stay at a certain weight or to continue with weight loss. So that's how your brain actually learned, it's a safe thing to lose weight and it's a bad thing to gain weight. The longer you've been doing that and the stronger your ED had an impact on your day-to-day life, the more the chances that once you start to gain weight, your brain will freak out. Your fear centers, such as the amygdala, will have so much stress because it learned that gaining weight is a bad thing. And the mean thing about that is now that your fear centers and your stress centers are so alert, it of course feels like actual fear in your body. And oftentimes we mistake that as intuition, and we think, oh, well, that means that it is something bad, or that means the more weight I will gain, the worse it will get. And while I understand where those thoughts are coming from because I had them myself, this is not true. And it's so important and also so hard to go against that fear and to know, oh, this is like my fear center responding. This is not an actual fear. It's not an actual danger. If somebody would come in and I would ask them, is it dangerous to eat this pasta? They would most certainly say no. But to know that and to be aware of that can be very helpful. And unfortunately, repetition is really important here. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but repeating the thing that you're so afraid of can be really, really crucial because, again, it's your brain that learned a behavior and that learned that gaining weight is bad when, in fact, it was actually reinforced by diet culture, by your own eating disorder. But when we recover and this fear comes up, of course, the eating disorder uses that as a chance to, use it as a reason and to say, see, you're already afraid. It's a bad thing. And that's why we should not listen to that. Another part that takes way longer to rewire than we think are the reward circuits. In the beginning, it might be a little bit of both sides. So when we start to allow ourselves to go all in and to eat, we might feel more rewarding feelings when we eat. But at the same time, they might still be off leash. They might still be out of whack. And at the same time, we might still respond better to restriction, again, because it's a learned behavior. Or what sometimes happens is that the reward system in the beginning actually, light up more while we're eating because we make the conscious decision to recover. But after a time when the honeymoon phase of recovery is over and when things become, more of a routine and when eating is not so exciting anymore because you challenge your fear foods, that's oftentimes when we have to push through, when we have to keep going, because that is when the real neural rewiring happens. In the beginning, it's more like a honeymoon phase. It's exciting. It can be fun. Again, for some people, it's the absolute opposite. But after a while, when it becomes more of a routine and our dopamine centers don't react to it as much anymore, that's when it's so important to continue doing what you're doing. Another part of the brain, like a lot of cognitive control areas, will work over time in your recovery. Because once you start doing new things, and like for a lot of people, eating more, eating at certain times, not moving is like a very, very, very new thing, especially if they had an eating disorder for a long time. But also for people who didn't have it a long time, it's still a new thing. And those centers are basically working to rewire, to learn new behaviors, and also to fight urges, because it's all about that. It's about to fight the urge to purge, to overexercise, to diet, to go back to restrictive rules, even to fight the urge to grab the protein bar instead of the chocolate bar. Those are all things that your brain is taking care of for you, and it's a constant fight, which is one of the many, many reasons why recovery can feel so exhausting and so tiring. Okay, now that we know all those things about the brain, what do we do with that? Yes, we know that our brain needs more time to catch up. We know that the brain is very impacted by the eating disorder. So how do I convince my eating disorder that recovery is the right thing? And the answer is you don't. Because once you choose recovery, we are not negotiating with the ED anymore. That is one thing that I tell my clients from the very beginning: we're not negotiating with the eating disorder. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to talk to you or that I'm not going to take you serious. But if there's a situation where I feel like, okay, this is really not, something that is just challenging for you, where of course I'm always going to make sure we're working through that together and we're going to make sure that even though it is challenging, it feels doable. But if something comes up where I really, really hear, this is not you speaking, this is the eating disorder speaking, I'm not going to negotiate. I'm going to be very honest. I'm going to say like, hey, this is really not you speaking. This is your eating disorder speaking, trying to find reasons. Let's take a look at that. But whether you're working with somebody or not, we are not negotiating with the eating disorder anymore. That is one big rule that can make it actually easier to navigate recovery, because otherwise you're in this constant fight of, shall I do that? Shall I do this? Shall I do that? Do I do it right? Do I make a compromise? And once you tell yourself, I'm not going to negotiate anymore, I'm not going to make compromises for my eating disorder anymore, you don't have to have all this thinking and all this decision making anymore. Of course, it's not always that easy to find out whether it's the eating disorder or not, but I'm going to give you a few very, very common examples of how the eating disorder is lying to you. Number one is that can't be healthy. Let's say somebody jumped into all in, or even if not, I hear that from people all the time. I'm so afraid that it's unhealthy. All of a sudden, I'm eating so much food that can't be healthy. And it's something where I'm always pointing out, well, was that something that you were concerned about when you had an eating disorder, when you were restricting, when you were over-exercising, when you were burning your body out? And normally the answer is no. So that always shows me, oh, that might be the eating disorder speaking. And I actually experienced the same thing. For 10 years straight, I was over-exercising, under-eating, harming my body, and I was very well aware that this was not healthy. But once I started recovering, all of a sudden all those fears came up. Back then I still thought that eating sugar would automatically cause diabetes, which is a very common misconception. And so I was like, what if I'm getting diabetes? What if this is unhealthy? And again, I never cared about that before when I still had an eating disorder. And that's a big thing, how the eating disorder is lying to you and trying to convince you, hey, this is unhealthy, better go back to the thing that was actually way more unhealthy. So, when I talk about this, it seems very logical, but I do understand how hard it is to be in the moment and to not get caught up in those lies. Another one is you will never be happy when you gain weight. That is also something that I personally experienced and that I know a lot of people are experiencing, where it feels like, oh, a little bit of weight gain is already horrible. How could I ever enter gaining more weight, maybe even going through overshoot weight? And I'm telling you right now, it is not easy, but it has to do a lot with mindset shifts. And I know the term mindset can be annoying, especially in recovery when everyone is telling you to shift your mindset and you don't even know how. But at the same time, it is really possible. And once you really commit to recovery and you make the conscious decision to allow yourself to let your body be, to allow yourself to stop holding on to that eating disorder identity. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of work that comes through it. There's, a lot of underlying issue that we have to take a look at. For some people, it's even trauma related. So there is a lot of work to do, but you still can make this conscious decision. And even though in the beginning it will still feel like the end of the world when your body starts to change, I can promise you right now it will get easier. There will be a time where it's not the end of the world anymore. And for me personally, I was never able to even believe that I could make it out of there. I was never able to believe that I could be okay with a healthy body because I was so attached to my sick body, to the, malnourished body. And now bodily changes are not even a thing for me anymore. If my body weight fluctuates, I'm just gonna grab a size bigger or smaller and that's it. And I was never even thinking that this could be able. And another lie is that everything is connected to your weight. You might know those situations where somebody says like, hey, you look pretty today. And immediately it's like, oh my God, I don't look sick anymore. If I look pretty, I can't look sick. Or for some people, it's even everything bad that happens has to do with their appearance or their weight. For instance, when I was starting to gain weight and I had situations that were interpersonally challenging, I always thought, oh, it's because I'm too ugly now. It's because I gained weight. That was never the reason for a fight, an argument, not being invited to something or whatever comes up. But of course, in my mind, that was the only logical explanation. And that was another way how the eating disorder was lying to me. Lie number 4 is that you will absolutely lose control if you let go of the eating disorder control. I touched on the topic control before because it's really important to me to mention that there's different ways of control. And the sick control, the eating disorder control, always feels like rushed. It feels like a sense of urgency. It feels very strict. And then there's the kind of control that you regain in recovery, the control over your life that feels way more intuitive, way more natural. But from an eating disorder standpoint, it's impossible to let go of the eating disorder control. And therefore, the ED will tell you that once you will let go of that control, you will lose control, whatever that means. All those drama scenarios light up in your head that again have to do with your amygdala and other fear centers of your brain. And you will automatically probably believe the ED. And that is another big, big lie. Just as lie number 5, you are the unicorn, you are the one person where recovery won't work, where it's actually either gonna be, oh, you will do all the things, but you will still struggle so much and you will never ever get better, or it's gonna be, oh, your body is the one body that will never stop gaining weight. I think we probably all had this fear at one point, what if I will never start to gain weight? And while I can understand that fear because I've been through it on my own, I can assure you that is nothing that you have to be afraid of. That's the eating disorder telling you that this is a possibility. That's the eating disorder creating more fear so that you go back to what you know, to your comfort zone that is actually very uncomfortable. But once you're in your eating disorder, it feels like a comfort zone. And so that is another lie the eating disorder is telling you. And lie number 6 is also one that I touched on in many of my videos, and that is you're not sick enough to get help. You don't have an actual eating disorder. Sometimes that's because people eat when in secret. Sometimes it's because people feel like they're not quote unquote able to be disciplined enough or to suppress their hunger cues. Sometimes it's because people think, oh, I have to lose more weight, or I was never in a clinic. Like everything that comes up that is, in the bubble of you're not sick enough is definitely a lie. Because there is a reason why you're watching this video. There is a reason why you are thinking about food, about your body, about movement all the time. As soon as food and everything connected to it has such an impact on your life, whether it's physically or whether it's mentally, you deserve help. You are sick enough to get help. In fact, this is not normal. This is actually a big warning sign, and you deserve help. You deserve to get better. I know that the EDs can be super competitive and maybe even compare to other people, to their weights or to their stories or whatever. And I made that mistake for a very long time where I thought, oh, I just have to push a little bit harder. But the actual answer is, and the truth is, the harder you push and the longer you go, the harder it'll get to get out there. It still will be possible, but it gets harder and harder over time. The longer you feed into those ED thoughts, into those ED lies, and choose to believe them, the harder it will get to rewire them in the end. So when it comes to ED recovery, my advice is always to rip the Band-Aid off, to jump into it, to do the things, to not wait another month or even another year, but to do it today, to not wait for Monday or to the next big date, to do it now, to start right now, not tomorrow morning, now. And that is something that, so many people tend to push it further out and further out and further out for no reason. The only reason is to satisfy the eating disorder, the one thing that we actually don't want to do anymore. So I really hope this video helped you guys. Let me know in the comments what you took from this video, what was helpful. If you have other questions, where you are at in your recovery, and as always, if you have other questions. For me personally, it is super helpful if you leave a like and if you just show YouTube that you like this kind of content. And otherwise, guys, I will see you in the next one.